Can you tell me how to get started with your banking concept? Why, yes, I can. Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. We're here today for another installment of our question and answer series. So let's dive right in. The first question I have is from Heather, and she asks, I have been watching some of your videos. Can you tell me how to get started with your banking concept? Absolutely. What I would suggest, of course, blanket, not knowing where you're starting from per se, is start with the original works on the infinite banking concept, Becoming Your Own Banker, which are R. Nelson Nash's book, his first book, Becoming Your Own Banker. And depending on how voracious you're going to be reading material before you get started, he wrote a second book called Building Your Warehouse of Wealth. You can get both of those books off of his website, www.infinitebanking.org. And of course, he did a live seminar that's recorded on DVD now that you can also procure from that website. But again, of course, I would obviously suggest the vast amount of material that we have covered here on the YouTube channel and the podcast, because there is a lot of my best practices. I mean, we've been running this podcast going on 2 years now, and I've just simply been trying to, along with question and answer series and quality interviews, and covering some significant quotes that I feel affect our financial thinking, I've been putting out nuts and bolts for quite a while now. So, of course, there's lots of material that you can get into. And what Nash said is that this idea is a paradigm shift. So depending on where you're at, that's going to determine what getting started looks like for you. And, of course, I put out our contact information regularly. I'd love to have a phone call where we could strategize where it is that you're coming from, what it is that you're wanting to do. I believe that every individual situation is very different. So I would like to have a phone call, and you can contact us by phone or by email to be able to hear about your individual situation and your goals and your ambitions and the things that you have going on. I don't have a very cookie cutter approach. I have a process, and that is going to look like more than one phone call for you to get started, because it takes more than one phone call to get started. This is something that, we approach anticipating to do over the course of our lifetime. Now, I definitely remember the fervor that I felt in wanting to get started and having read enough, listened enough, had enough questions answered. So not knowing everything, but certainly knowing enough about this idea of becoming my own banker that I was also ready to get started. And I did benefit from reading the books, watching a live presentation, having my personal questions answered, having a phone call, more than one phone call, and then getting my first policy started. So that is my suggestion, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you tuning in, and I appreciate your question. I look forward to our conversation sincerely. This next question comes from Becky. She asked, what happens if you pay higher premiums? Now, that question was at a live presentation that I had made, and I could see that this individual was catching on to the concept of becoming your own banker, and then the thought process obviously turned to this question, well, what if those numbers are bigger? Well, the short answer is that if those numbers are bigger, those numbers are bigger. Okay, the premiums that we pay determine the kind of death benefit that we procure for ourselves. Now, what I'm talking about here is owning and using a properly structured whole life insurance policy with a mutual company that pays dividends. And the premium that we choose to pay is going to determine the amount of death benefit that we procure for ourselves in that policy, which, again, pursuant to the structure of that policy, based off of our interactions in writing and constructing a policy for you as an individual, that death benefit is also going to then determine the amount of cash value pursuant to that structure of that policy that we discuss. It's going to determine the amount of cash value that that policy has at any given point in time. Therefore, if we're paying higher premiums, that's going to increase the death benefit, which is going to inherently increase the cash values that we can leverage and borrow against. So if the numbers are going to be higher, the numbers are going to be higher. And there was actually a second question that came into the conversation here, and I believe that we can cover it now. And it was connected to the first. And that was, can you put, and the number that was thrown out was $100,000 into a policy like if you were selling a home. Okay, so what we're talking about are two different things here. First, again, deciding on an appropriate amount of premium for you. And that's going to determine the death benefit and the cash values based on the structure of the policy for you. Also, is it possible to construct a policy where it can receive a one-time, never to be repeated again, initial premium payment in addition to the premiums that you would like to continue in the future? Absolutely. There are policies with companies that can do that. So you can take static funds from somewhere, lazy capital, lazy dollars, if you have something sitting in a location that you could access readily to be able to contribute towards that first year premium of a policy. It's called a dump in. Some people call it. It's called a single premium first year only premium. Okay. So let's say, and again, don't get bogged down in the numbers, but let's say we were talking about a $10,000 a year policy. $10,000 a year is going to be the regularly scheduled premiums on that policy. But if you also had a lump sum from a windfall or from static funds or what have you that you would like to put into that policy in that first year, yes, you can do that. That policy would need to be properly constructed to be able to receive that dump in, to be able to receive that single premium in that first year. And you would also be able to access, because that amount, that particular premium is going to be in paid up addition. So that's going to be paid up additional insurance. That amount of premium will be able to be leveraged in a significant way virtually immediately. And by immediately, I mean within 30 days of that policy going in force and that premium being paid, that additional single premium should be able to be accessed in that very first year and really within 30 days. So the significance of the amount of premiums, I would just like to point out here, should be respective of each individual person. Decimals move left and right. It could be 10, it could be 10,000, it could be 10 million, okay? The principle applies. So, my question back to that, because I like how Nash has pointed out before that it's biblical to answer a question with a question. My question back there is, well, how well capitalized do you want to be? What kinds of numbers do you think are going to be appropriate for you? Be it scheduled premiums that you anticipate paying into the future to own and operate and use a properly structured whole life insurance policy. And then also, that's a great question about one-time premium payments at the beginning of a policy. Now, if you've been implementing this idea of becoming your own banker and you have systematically and intentionally created a void somewhere in your system, created space through policy loans where when you anticipate a windfall and you receive a windfall of money, then you have a beautiful environment to be able to insert that capital into that's under your control, that can compound, that will, and remember this, every premium dollar, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about paid up additional insurance or just the regular base premium of a policy, every premium dollar contributes to the future growth of that policy. So how big do you want your numbers to be? How soon would you want to start? These are great questions. I appreciate those questions. I always enjoy a live presentation and live interaction, but I also want to be able to answer this question for the benefit of our listeners here. So thank you very much for the question, Becky. I appreciate those. This next is a comment from the same live event that I've just referenced, where there was an individual that, when we got to the question and answer time of that presentation, made a statement about capitalization and said, well, yes, but when you make your first premium payment, you don't get all of that back right away. And while that's not necessarily a question, it's certainly a mental hurdle that has to be worked through. And Nash addresses it in one of his core principles, which is, well, in a couple really, in thinking long range. Because if we're thinking about next week, if we're thinking about next month or only this year, we're probably not thinking long range enough to merit paying a significant premium into a policy that we anticipate to own and control and operate over the course of our lifetime, obviously. And that does bring me to the second key principle of Nash's, when he said that we can't be afraid to capitalize. Think about his grocery store example. Think about all the legwork that went into getting the land, getting the permits and the furniture and the construction, just all the time and the money that went into capitalizing on this business, on this entity that we would be both the consumer and the operator in, the owner. Okay. Well, this is a privatized banking system. How long, again, I'm going to go back to asking questions to answer questions because, again, Nash said it's biblical. And here's what I'm asking. How long do you want to have a personalized banking system? How long are you going to want to be able to grow your capital uninterrupted with compound interest while maintaining access, while maintaining control? How long do you want to be able to do that? So I completely understand that sentiment, that feeling, and I remember having to work through that because with my first policy, my wife and I wrote what was for us a very significant check for our very first policy. It was a big deal for us. And it certainly meant something to us as well to know that we were going to write a check that was going to create this entity that we would own for the rest of our lives and have all these benefits and the use of it. But squaring away mentally for ourselves that we were not going to be able to access 100% of what we were capitalizing this entity with right away was a step for us. And it will be a step for you, just like it was a step for this individual. So I appreciate that statement. I'm glad that it was made out loud so that we could have a bit more of a discussion at that time. And I wanted to be able to share that here as well for those that are catching on to this idea of becoming your own banker, but they're still experiencing that hesitancy of, well, yeah, but when I start this policy, I'm not going to be able to access all of that money right away. True. No question about it. True. But I would ask you, how long range are you thinking? Because when we do walk that out, and I'm not talking about anything outside of the guaranteed access to capital that would be in a properly constructed contract. Once we realize that a whole life policy from the time that it goes into force goes from whatever that initial cash value is all the way to the full face amount, that full death benefit amount, that it must grow uninterrupted from today to that future amount of whatever it is, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever that number is. Doesn't matter what that number is, but it must eventually equal that number. Well, we're going to then need to realize that along that trajectory, there's going to come a time where we have access to more capital than premium dollars we've paid in a given year. So how long range are we thinking? And we certainly can't be afraid to capitalize. I appreciate that statement, and thank you for letting me discuss that here for the benefit of everyone. Next, we have Pat, who asks, do you sell term insurance? I have personal term insurance, 10-year, that's soon to be up. and the cost will be more than double to renew for another 10 years. It's for if I die, my loved ones can bury me, and there may be some left over for taking care of children. Well, what I've decided to do in transitioning from simply being a consumer, simply being someone who is practicing the infinite banking concept myself as an individual, to now becoming a professional, I have decidedly only done business with banking style policies. So that's just what I've personally decided to do. I'm not worried about what anyone else is doing, but myself, I write properly structured whole life policies with mutual companies that pay dividends, because those are the kinds of policies and these are the kinds of companies that I own policies with. Now, I'm not married to a company. I'm married to my wife, Lauren, but these properly structured whole life policies are a very particular product constructed in a very particular way after going through our process here for those that are looking to implement the infinite banking concept. So I'm very glad that when someone thinks of insurance, that they think of us. For sure. I'm happy to get those calls and those messages and those questions. So for the benefit of everyone here, because I've covered a lot of information and material about the different types of insurance, the different philosophies on insurance. There's lots of material here if you want to look for that. But to answer this question, no, not particularly. It's true that to have a properly structured policy, it may be necessary, not always, but it may be necessary to add a term rider onto a whole life policy. So there are various riders that a policy can have, but on a whole life insurance policy, the most common is going to be a paid up insurance rider, a PUA rider, where you can increase the cash value of a policy right away. And then as that policy grows, it just matures and gets more efficient over time. That's just the nature of a whole life insurance policy. And by having a cash valued paid up additional insurance rider on that policy, you can increase the cash value in the beginning. You'll have more access to capital in the beginning. A term rider allows you to increase the death benefit perhaps to an amount that you would like to have just for coverage purposes, just for protection purposes. And everyone should be adequately protected. I agree. I don't know that there's anything more admirable than thinking of others beyond your own lifetime. That's a beautiful thing, and that's why I loved getting this question, and I want to be able to address it here for the benefit of everyone. I believe that everyone should be adequately protected for sure. Now, again, with a few questions, I could ask where someone's at in their thinking to be receptive to the idea of, what do you think about becoming your own banker? Are you willing to read a book about what it would mean to finance the cars in your life? Just to pick one example, the infinite banking is obviously infinitely more than just that. But to simply write a term policy, no, I don't have that. I don't do that as a practice, nor do I write any kind of policy that's not with folks that are actively looking to become your own banker. And I know that there are plenty of routes to be able to get that. And I also understand the crux of the issue here, which is here's someone who is looking to have a product that they want. Admirable. I love it. A product that they want. And they're finding out that after a certain amount of time has gone by, a certain term has lapsed, that the next term is going to be exponentially a greater cost. Now, again, if we're just talking about insurance, we're going to see that term is cheaper. It must be so due to its nature, due to the type of product that it is, because it virtually never pays out. Virtually never pays out. We're talking about a percentage of a percentage point pays out. But obviously, as our age increases, that cost can become prohibitive. I mean, here is more than double for the another term of 10 years. So there are lots of benefits of whole life insurance. I'm not going to take too much time to tout those here because we've done that extensively elsewhere, but that's certainly one of the differences to know that contractually I have the right to pay in policies that I own for the rest of my lifetime. I pay that premium that I decided to pay from the start, and all these other obligations are on the insurance company to perform. The death benefit, the access to cash value, not having to go through underwriting in the future to maintain this policy. It's mine. I pay the premiums, and then that's it. There is a benefit to that, and certainly there's a cost as well, because whole life insurance is going to cost more than term insurance, and here we're seeing part of the reason why. They are different products. Whole life insurance, you own it for your whole life. Now, I've covered this particular subject of term insurance versus whole life insurance. The idea of, well, should I buy whole life insurance, or is that the worst place to put money, and should I be buying term and investing the difference? I've covered that. I would encourage you to check out that information on our channel and podcast. Suffice it to say, these are admirable goals that you have in looking beyond your lifetime. I commend you for it. I encourage you on your path. I'd love to have a conversation about more details of your particular situation to see what would be the best choice for you. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I do look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much for the question. This next question comes from Devin. Devin says, "Hey Jesse, I'm currently learning more and more about becoming your own banker. I read my wife and I are 20 years old with no debt, no kids yet. What do you recommend to learn more on getting started with the whole concept?" I love it. More questions about getting started. "I want to start a policy, but don't really know how to actually get set up. Do you have any more information on that? Thanks." Devin. Well, Devin, I certainly do have more information about that, and I can discern your enthusiasm. We've actually had our first phone call since this question came up. So let me hit home again. Well, let me say congratulations. I don't believe it's here. I believe it was in our other conversation or another message with question that you sent. Living a debt-free life. Both of y'all in your careers now, young people, productive people. I love it. I commend you in what you're doing. I'm very proud to hear about what you've done to invest in your education, even beyond your profession, being open-minded and asking questions like this. And when you get to that point where you're really trying to figure out like how to put pen to paper, how to write checks and where to, and rubber meeting road, the education experience doesn't stop. And we've talked about that. But again, here for the benefit of everyone, the education doesn't stop. I still reread R. Nelson Nash's first book, Becoming Your Own Banker, and get nuggets out of it to this day. In our 7th year so far of owning whole life insurance policies and using them for the infinite banking concept, financing our lifestyle, I still am learning from Nash's very first book, let alone his other book and other material. So the education process doesn't stop. When you're ready to get started, you're going to do what it is that you did. We've already had our first phone call. We've already scheduled our second phone call. I've been able to learn a lot more about your individual situation, what you and your lovely bride have going on. So again, for the benefit of others, that's why our contact information is here. So Devin, I thank you very much for that question. And for everyone else that's listening, if you'd like to have a conversation about how to get started implementing the infinite banking concept into your household or your business or your investing, then you can reach us at 828-817-4223, or you can email durhamtalents@gmail.com. This has been a great pleasure for me. I look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day. Take care. please leave your comments and questions below, and we'll get to those in our next episode. It's my birthday, I'll record if I want to. I'll record if I want to. I'll record if I want to. You would record too.